I was a custodian at Simeon Academy. Tonight, my company is signing a contract to maintain 41 Chicago public schools buildings. Say something.
Xavier, I swear I had no idea. This whole time, I didn't know it was you.
I know you didn't know. That was the point.
I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Victor left me with nothing. I lost the house. I lost so much, Xavier. And the whole time you were quietly building all of this. And I never saw it. I never saw you.
Amaya, I have documentation of your affair. I still have the draft custody schedule your attorney floated. I've had both for years.
Then why did you let me work here? Why give me any of this? If you already knew everything.
Xavier draws a long breath. His lips part slightly. But that answer, the one that's about to bring Amaya to her knees, the one no one in that room, not even she herself, could have seen coming, is only revealed in full in the next part. My name is Xavier Ellison. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. If you show up, if you work with your hands and keep your word, the world eventually pays you back in respect. I was wrong about the timeline. I wasn't wrong about the truth. It was a Tuesday in October, and I was pushing a supply cart down the third-floor hallway of Simeon Career Academy on the south side of Chicago. The smell of pine cleaner and old radiator heat thick in the air, when my phone buzzed with a message from my son's school about a field trip form. I clocked out at 4:40 that afternoon, same as I had for 6 years, and drove north toward the home Amaya and I owned together in Bronzeville, thinking about nothing more complicated than what to make Andre for dinner. I want you to remember that detail, because 40 minutes later, I would be standing frozen in my own hallway, listening to my wife tell her mother, in a voice bright with relief, that she was finally leaving me. Before we get into the story, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, stay with me. Because what Amaya didn't know that night was that I already had something quiet sitting on my phone that would change everything. Not a threat, not a plan for revenge, just 14 months of patience. Let me take you back to where it started. Our home was a modest 2-story house on a tree-lined block near 43rd Street. The kind with a porch that creaked and a mailbox that leaned a little to the left. We'd bought it together 9 years earlier, back when a down payment from 2 incomes still felt like something worth celebrating. Amaya and I had been married for 13 years by then, and for most of them, I thought we were building something together. A home, a son, a future neither of us had grown up with. I worked custodial maintenance for Chicago Public Schools. 11 years, no write-ups, no missed shifts, even the winter I had walking pneumonia. It wasn't glamorous work. I emptied trash cans, fixed jammed lockers, waxed gym floors until they shone like still water. But it paid steady, and steady was something I'd promised myself I would give my son, because I never had it growing up. That evening, I walked up the porch steps with a grocery bag in each hand. Chicken thighs, rice, the orange juice Andre liked, and I heard Amaya's voice through the screen door before I even got my key in the lock. She had me on speaker with her mother, Efua, not realizing how close I was, not realizing the storm door didn't latch all the way unless you leaned into it. "Mama, I can't keep pretending," she was saying, and there was a kind of lightness in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Victor's helping me look at places near the lake. I can't keep telling people my husband's a janitor. I'm done." I stood there with the bags cutting into my fingers. He works hard, Amaya, Efua said, and there was something careful in her tone, something that told me this wasn't the first time she'd tried to talk sense into her daughter. Working hard isn't the same as going anywhere, Mama. I deserve better than this. I deserve someone who isn't ashamed to walk into a room with me. The grocery bag slipped from my right hand. A jar of pasta sauce hit the porch boards with a soft, dull thud and didn't break. I didn't move to pick it up. I didn't slam through the door. I didn't do any of the things a man is supposed to do in that moment, according to every movie I'd ever watched. I just stood there, and something in my chest went very still and very quiet, the way a lake goes still right before the first hard freeze. Here's the part Amaya never understood about me. I don't yell when I'm hurt. I go quiet, and I go to work. Because the truth is, that phone call didn't break something new in me that night. It confirmed something I had already suspected for over a year. I walked back down the porch steps, left the second grocery bag right there on the boards, and got into my car. I sat in the driver's seat under the orange glow of a street lamp, and I opened the voicemail app on my phone, a saved message I hadn't listened to in months, one I'd never had the heart to delete. I pressed play. 14 months earlier, my phone had rung late one night, a call from Amaya's number. When I picked up, no one spoke, but I could hear her in the background, laughing with Victor, her voice bright, the way it used to be bright with me. God, Victor, I swear, the second I get out of this, the second I'm free of the janitor, I am never looking back. The call had dropped a few seconds later, but by then it had already saved itself as a voicemail, sitting quietly in my phone the way a splinter sits quietly under skin. I hadn't confronted her then. I hadn't confronted her for 14 months. Some men would call that weakness. I called it strategy. Because a man with a son to protect doesn't burn his own house down out of anger. He builds a new one, quietly, brick by brick, until the day he doesn't need the old one anymore. I remembered another night, almost 2 years back, when I'd worked a double shift stripping and waxing floors so I could pay the $2,400 tuition for the personal branding executive intensive Amaya swore would change her life. I came home at 3 a.m. with my hands raw and cracked from the chemicals. And the next morning, she wrinkled her nose at me in front of her book club friends and said, "He does floors, don't mind the smell." I hadn't said a word then either. I sat in that car outside our house, phone in hand, and for the first time in 14 months, I let myself feel the full weight of what I already knew. Then I put the phone away, wiped my face once with the back of my hand, and walked back up the porch steps to pick up the grocery bag I'd left behind. My inner voice was very calm when I finally spoke to myself. I waited for the right moment. Now it's here. What Amaya didn't know, what nobody in that house knew yet, was that the janitor she was so ashamed of already had a lawyer, a business plan, and a sister with a law degree quietly working behind the scenes. And in less than 2 years, she was going to walk into his office building without even knowing whose name was on the deed. The next morning, Amaya was the one who brought it up, not me. She sat across from me at our kitchen table, still in her silk robe, stirring cream into her coffee like she was preparing for a business meeting rather than the end of a 13-year marriage. Andre was already at school. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old radiator. "Xavier," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." I set my own mug down slowly. "Okay," I said. She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. "Okay?" "Okay," I repeated. "If that's what you want, Amaya, I'm not going to fight you on it." I watched something flicker across her face. Relief, mostly, but underneath it, a thread of confusion. She had braced herself for a battle. I wasn't giving her one. "I want Andre to stay here, in this house, near his school," I told her. "You and Andre keep the place. I'll find somewhere else." She actually softened for a moment. reaching across the table like she might touch my hand, some old habit not yet extinguished. That's really generous of you, Xavier. It's what's best for our son, I said, and I meant it, though it wasn't the whole truth of my reasoning. We met with a mediator 2 weeks later, a small office on South Michigan Avenue with a window unit that rattled every few minutes. At one point during the session, Amaya's side floated a proposed schedule that quietly trimmed my weekends down to 1 visit a month, citing her need for stability while she got back on her feet. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at the mediator and said I wouldn't sign anything that reduced my time with my son. And by the time the final paperwork was drawn up, my standard visitation had been restored in full. Every other weekend, holidays split evenly. Amaya never brought the earlier draft up again. I kept a copy of it anyway, filed away with everything else. When the mediator finished reading through the property terms, Amaya sat with her arms crossed, already dressed like she was interviewing for a different life. A fitted blazer, gold hoops, hair freshly done. She couldn't resist a small, satisfied smile in my direction. "At least you won't have to worry about money anymore, Xavier," she said, low enough that only I could hear. "Since you don't really have any." I let that sit for a second. Then I signed the papers with a steady hand. What Amaya didn't know, what she had no reason to know, was that 18 months earlier we had both signed for a home equity line of credit, ostensibly to pay for the renovation she'd been asking about for years. A redone kitchen, a home office, new flooring throughout. My sister Essie, who'd passed the bar 4 years prior and worked family law downtown, had sat with me at her kitchen table on her lunch breaks, walking me through exactly how a homeowner with sole management authority over shared finances could legally redirect dispersed funds into a registered business, so long as the debt itself was disclosed and both names remained on record. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't fraud. Amaya had signed the paperwork herself. She simply never asked what happened to the money afterward, and I never volunteered it. That home equity line hadn't gone toward granite countertops. It had gone into a small facilities management operation I'd registered under the name Legacy Facilities Management, LLC. The house Amaya thought she was generously letting me walk away from wasn't the simple asset she imagined. It came with a payment obligation she didn't fully understand yet, a payment I had already restructured my own finances around, and one she was about to inherit without me saying a single word. I smiled at her. Small, easy, unreadable. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. She had no idea what she'd just handed me, or what she'd handed the woman who used to be my wife and was about to become, for the first time in her life, entirely responsible for her own choices. Amaya had spent the last few years of our marriage doing informal social media consulting, brand coaching she called it, helping small boutique owners polish their online presence for a modest fee here and there. It was never steady income, more a hobby dressed up as a career, and once Victor entered the picture with his money and his connections, she let it drop entirely. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Victor started showing up regularly. A leased Mercedes in the driveway some weekends, weekend trips to the lake, jewelry that showed up in her Instagram stories with captions like, "Finally living the life I always deserved," and "Some people just don't know how to level up, and that's okay." Friends forwarded me screenshots, half expecting me to be devastated. I looked at those photographs the way you'd look at weather reports for a city you no longer lived in. Interesting, but no longer relevant to my day. Instead, I worked. I picked up every overtime shift Chicago public schools would give me, banked every dollar, and spent my evenings in a borrowed office space in the West Loop that Essie let me use after hours from her firm's overflow suite. I used 11 years of hands-on knowledge, every broken boiler, every leaking roof, every supply contract CPS schools actually needed, to write proposals for small maintenance contracts. My first contract was tiny, after-hours cleaning for 2 elementary schools in Englewood, worth barely enough to cover a part-time crew of 3. But it was a start, and I understood something most people overlook. Contracts build reputations, and reputations build bigger contracts. One evening, my phone rang. It was Afua, Amaya's mother, her voice careful and low, like she didn't want to be overheard. "Xavier," she said, "I'm not calling to take sides. I raised my daughter better than this, and I told her so to her face. She needs to wake up before she loses something she can't get back." "I appreciate you saying that, Afua," I said. "I mean it." "You're a good man," she said. "Better than she realizes right now. I just hope she figures that out before it's too late for her. Not for you." I didn't say much in response. I never was one to speak more than I needed to. But hanging up that phone, I felt something settle in my chest. Not vindication exactly, but confirmation that I wasn't imagining the truth of my own worth, even if the person who should have seen it clearest hadn't yet. Legacy Facilities Management grew slower than I wanted, but faster than I expected. Within a year, I had 11 employees, 3 vans with the company logo Essie had designed for me, and a contract with 4 CPS schools on the south and west sides. I hired 2 men from Simeon Career Academy's own maintenance crew, men who remembered me, men who trusted me because they'd worked beside me for years and knew I didn't cut corners. Essie came by the office most Fridays with coffee and a legal pad, going over contracts with me late into the evening. She never let me forget what this was really for. "You're not building this to prove something to Amaya," she told me once, sliding a stack of paperwork across the desk. "You're building it so Andre never has to feel small the way you did." "I know," I said. And I did know. Every late night, every contract I fought to win, every dollar I reinvested instead of spent, it was for my son, first and always. Andre stayed with me every other weekend, and those Saturdays were the best of my week. He'd sit at a folding table in the corner of my small office, doing his homework or drawing pictures of buildings, asking me questions about the vans parked outside. "Dad, is this your company?" he asked one Saturday, eyes wide with a kind of pride I hadn't expected. "It's ours," I told him. "Yours, mine, and Aunt Essie's." He grinned at that, the same easy grin he'd had since he was small, and went back to his coloring. 2 years passed that way, quiet, deliberate, brick by brick. Legacy Facilities Management grew from 4 schools to 17. I moved into a proper office suite in the West Loop with my own name on the lease. I stood at the window one evening, looking out over the Chicago skyline, lit gold against a darkening October sky, almost exactly 2 years to the week since that night on the porch. I thought about Amaya, about Victor, about the life she believed she'd traded up for. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt something closer to patience finally paying interest. I'm going to show my son a different kind of man, I told myself, standing there with the city spread out below me. Not one who screams when he's hurt, one who builds. I had no idea, standing at that window, just how soon Amaya would be walking back into my life. Not as my wife, not as a stranger, but as an employee who had no idea whose company she'd just agreed to work for. Xavier had the truth about the house, the loan, and the company 2 years before Amaya ever found out. Was he right to stay quiet and let her sign? Or should he have told her the truth at that kitchen table before it was too late? Comment 1 if he was right to stay silent. Comment 2 if he should have spoken up. 2 years is long enough for a foundation to crack, if it was never built on anything solid to begin with. Victor Lang's downfall came fast once it started. A former business partner sued him over a failed investment scheme involving a chain of nightclubs on the north side, and the lawsuit exposed debts Victor had hidden from Amaya for the better part of a year. nearly $180,000 owed across 3 different creditors. Within weeks, his assets were frozen pending litigation. He packed 2 suitcases, left a note on the kitchen counter, and disappeared to Atlanta, leaving Amaya to face the fallout alone. Without his money to help cover the gap, the home equity payment she'd been managing on her own for 2 years, the one she'd never fully understood, the one she'd always assumed was some small leftover renovation debt, became something she simply couldn't carry. She missed one payment, then another. By the time she called the lender, the house was already 3 months from foreclosure. She sold it in a hurry, for barely enough to clear the debt, and moved back in with Afua within the month. Back into the small house on the south side she'd worked so hard to leave behind. I heard about it the way most people in our old circle heard about it, secondhand, through a cousin, through a church friend, through the particular quiet efficiency of a neighborhood that always knows everyone's business eventually. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't gloat. I simply kept doing what I'd been doing, running my company, raising my son, showing up. What I didn't expect was for Amaya to walk directly into the middle of it. Legacy Facilities Management had grown enough by then that Essie handled most of the hiring for our administrative and client relations staff, since I focused on operations and contracts. One Tuesday afternoon, Essie called me into her office with a strange look on her face, somewhere between disbelief and dark amusement. "You need to see this resume," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. I opened it and felt the air leave the room for a second. Amaya Ellison. Same resume format she'd used for years, still listing her old married name, applying for an administrative coordinator position at a company called Legacy Facilities Management, LLC. A name, I realized, with something between irony and disbelief, that meant nothing to her. She had no idea it was mine. The company had grown well past the point where my name was attached to every piece of paperwork. Essie and our operations director handled most external communication, and the West Loop office listed only the LLC name on its glass door. "She doesn't know," Essie said quietly. I checked twice. I sat with that for a long moment. Part of me wanted to shred the application and never think of it again, but another part of me, the part that had spent 2 years watching my son bounce between 2 households, praying his mother would find her footing again for his sake, thought of something else entirely. "Hire her," I said finally. Essie raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "She needs the work. Andre needs his mother to be stable. And Amaya," I said, choosing my words carefully, "needs to learn some things the hard way, in a place where I control the lesson." Essie studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your call, little brother." Amaya was hired 2 weeks later as an administrative coordinator in client relations, working out of the West Loop office, my office, on a floor she had never once visited, under an org chart that listed her direct supervisor as someone else entirely. My name appeared nowhere on her onboarding paperwork. I made sure of it. For the first few months, I kept my distance entirely, working mostly out of a satellite office near our Englewood site so our paths wouldn't cross. Essie reported back occasionally, always with a raised eyebrow and a knowing tone. "She's actually good at the job," Essie admitted one Friday evening, dropping a folder on my desk. "Organized, sharp with clients. She's proud of herself." I felt something complicated hearing that. Not resentment, but a kind of weary recognition. Amaya had never lacked capability. She had simply spent years believing that dignity only existed in certain rooms, wearing certain labels. Word got back to me that Amaya had taken to telling coworkers with unmistakable pride about her fresh start, how she'd finally rebuilt herself professionally after a difficult divorce, how she was proving she could stand entirely on her own 2 feet. In break-room conversations, she'd apparently say things like, "I finally got out of a situation that was holding me back," never once naming me, never once imagining I was 3 floors above her, reviewing budget reports with her paycheck listed among 200 others. It might have stayed that way indefinitely, if not for one meeting in late September. Legacy Facilities Management was competing for one of its biggest contracts yet, a comprehensive multi-year maintenance agreement with Chicago Public Schools, covering nearly 40 buildings across the south and west sides. Amaya, eager to prove herself to leadership she didn't realize included me, sat in on a strategy meeting with our operations team, offering polished, confident input on client messaging and public perception. At one point, discussing how to frame the company's founding story for a CPS press packet, Amaya said something that made the room go quiet. "We should be careful not to lean too hard on the whole blue-collar roots angle," she said, flipping through a printed draft. "I mean, obviously some people just clean floors and toilets for a living and never move past it. We don't want the company sounding like it came from nowhere. We want it to sound polished, professional." A pause settled over the conference table. Marcus, one of our senior facility supervisors, a man I'd worked alongside years earlier at Simeon Career Academy, one of the first 2 employees I'd hired when Legacy was just 3 vans and a dream, leaned back in his chair with a small, dry smile. "Funny," he said, just loud enough for half the table to hear. "The boss tells that story every chance he gets. Says the biggest lessons he ever learned about running a company came from cleaning toilets and fixing boilers at 2 in the morning. Told the whole leadership team that at last year's holiday party." Amaya's smile faltered, just slightly, like a crack forming beneath a frozen surface. "The boss?" she repeated. "Mr. Ellison," Marcus said simply, and went back to his notes as if he hadn't just dropped a stone into still water. Amaya's face went pale. She recovered quickly, laughing it off, saying something about how every founder's story has a humble beginnings angle these days. But something in her posture had shifted. I heard about it from Essie that evening, word for word, and I felt the first quiet turn of a gear I'd set in motion 2 years earlier. The second crack came from an unexpected place, our son. Andre had started visiting me at the West Loop office some Saturdays when Amaya had to work, sitting in the waiting area with his tablet or homework while I finished up. One weekend, Amaya picked him up directly from my office instead of Ifua's house, since her shift had run long. Andre, cheerful and completely unaware of the storm he was about to stir, chattered the whole elevator ride down. "Dad's office is so big, Mom," he said, swinging Amaya's hand as they walked to the car. "He's got a whole corner one with windows on both sides. Bigger than yours, I bet." Amaya laughed it off in the moment, telling him that was nice, sweetheart, distracted by traffic and the parking garage exit. But that night, alone in her mother's kitchen, she sat with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, turning the pieces over. Marcus's comment, Andre's offhand remark about a corner office with windows, the fact that she'd never actually seen her own company's founder in person, not once in 4 months of employment. The following Monday, while pulling an old contract file for reference on an unrelated task, she came across the original filing for the very first 2 elementary school contracts Legacy had ever won. The same ones I'd fought for back when the company was nothing but 3 folding chairs and a dream. Buried in the signature line, 3 folders deep, Xavier D. Ellison, founder and chief executive officer. She stared at it a long time before her hands began to tremble. She found herself standing alone in the 3rd-floor women's restroom minutes later, staring into the mirror above the sink, her reflection pale under the fluorescent light. Standing there, Amaya wasn't just afraid of being caught working for her ex-husband. She was afraid of what it meant about her own judgment, that the man she'd measured against a title and a paycheck had been building something enormous the entire time she looked away. Underneath the panic was an old wound, the one that had nothing to do with Xavier at all. A lifelong fear of being ordinary, of ending up exactly where she started. That fear was what sent her toward Victor in the first place, and it was the same fear now staring back at her in the mirror, dressed as shame. "No," she whispered to herself, gripping the edge of the porcelain sink until her knuckles went white. "No, it can't be." The mug of coffee she'd been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered against the tile floor. 3 days after Amaya found that signature line, Essie met me in my office with something in her hand I wasn't expecting. A small flash drive. "I made something," she said, setting it carefully on my desk like it might bruise. Andre helped me pick the pictures. I looked at her, waiting. "There's footage from the early days," she explained. "You fixing that boiler at Marshall Elementary at 11 at night. You and Andre unpacking supply boxes in this office, back when it was just 400 square feet. And there's a note Andre wrote for us last month when we were putting it together. He drew a picture of you and wrote something underneath it." She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a child's careful handwriting beneath a crayon drawing of a man in a hard hat standing next to a much smaller figure. "My dad is my hero." I sat with that for a long moment, throat tight in a way I wasn't proud of showing, even to my own sister. "He wanted it in there," Essie said gently. "He wanted people to see it." I looked at the flash drive for a long moment, then nodded once. "Use it," I said, "for the CPS event." The contract signing ceremony for the Chicago Public Schools Comprehensive Facilities Agreement was held 2 weeks later at a hotel ballroom in the West Loop, not far from our office. It was, by far, the largest event Legacy Facilities Management had ever hosted. Nearly 200 people, including CPS district leadership, school principals from across the South and West sides, board members, vendors, and every employee of our company, Amaya included. I wore a dark navy suit that evening, tailored, understated. Essie had told me once that the way I carried myself in a room had changed over the past 2 years. Steadier, quieter, but somehow taking up more space than I used to. I didn't feel like a different man. I felt, finally, like the man I'd always believed I could be, given the chance. I watched Amaya from across the room before the ceremony began. She stood near the back with a small cluster of coworkers, a champagne flute in her hand, laughing at something someone said, still unaware, or perhaps only now beginning to suspect, exactly what she was about to witness. When the district superintendent finished her opening remarks, I was introduced to the room as the founder and CEO of Legacy Facilities Management. I walked to the small stage at the front of the ballroom, and I kept my remarks simple, the way I keep most things. 8 years ago, I said, I was a custodian at Simeon Career Academy on the South Side. I emptied trash cans, I waxed gym floors, I fixed broken lockers at 2 in the morning so kids wouldn't have a jammed locker slowing them down before their first class. I paused, letting my eyes move slowly across the room. Tonight, my company is signing a 5-year agreement to maintain 41 Chicago Public Schools buildings, including the very school where I started. There was a ripple of applause. I let my gaze move, unhurried, to the back of the room, where Amaya stood frozen, her champagne flute tilted slightly in her trembling hand. Her smile had gone rigid, like glass about to crack. The room, full of 200 people, seemed to narrow down to just the two of us for one long, suspended moment. Then the flute slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the polished floor, the sound sharp and unmistakable in the sudden hush of the room. Heads turned. A few people gasped softly. Amaya stood frozen, staring at me across the crowd, her hand still hovering in the air where the glass had been. I gave the room a small, measured nod and continued. I want to thank my sister, Essie Ellison, our legal counsel and operations lead since day one, for putting together something I think says this better than I can. The lights dimmed. Essie's video began to play on the large screen behind me. It opened with grainy footage of me at Marshall Elementary, 11 at night, sleeves rolled up, sweat on my brow, fixing a boiler that had gone out in the middle of a cold snap. It moved to photos of our first tiny office. 3 folding chairs, a card table, 2 supply vans parked outside a rented storage unit. Then it showed Andre, younger, maybe 7, helping me label cardboard boxes with a crooked marker, his tongue poking out in concentration. The final image held for 5 full seconds. Andre's crayon drawing, his careful, uneven handwriting beneath it. My dad is my hero. The room went completely silent. I heard someone near the front sniffle. A woman 2 tables over pressed a napkin to her eyes. Even people who had never met me before that evening seemed moved by something honest and unguarded in those images. A story that had nothing to do with polish or performance, and everything to do with persistence. I found Amaya's face again in the crowd. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but she stood perfectly still, not daring to wipe them away, not daring to draw more attention than she'd already drawn with the shattered glass at her feet. After the ceremony wound down, as guests mingled near the bar and the catering staff cleared plates, Amaya approached one of our event coordinators and asked, in a voice barely above a whisper, if she could speak with me privately. I agreed to 5 minutes in a small side room off the main ballroom. She came in, still visibly shaken, mascara smudged despite her best efforts to fix it in a restroom mirror somewhere along the way. "Xavier," she started, voice cracking immediately. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea this was you. This whole time, I know you didn't know," I said quietly. That was the point. She flinched at that, but pressed on. "I was wrong," she said, tears falling freely now. "I was so wrong about everything. Victor left me with nothing. I lost the house, I lost so much, Xavier. And the whole time, you were building this, and I never saw it. I never saw you." "Amaya," I said, and something in my voice made her stop. "I'm not angry with you for wanting a better life," I told her, steady and even. "You're allowed to want more than what we had. Where you went wrong was believing a man's value lives in the job he's doing right now, instead of in who he actually is underneath it." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, saying nothing. "I have documentation," I continued, "of the affair timeline. I still have the draft custody schedule from mediation, the one your attorney floated that would have cut my time with Andre down to 1 weekend a month before I thought to have it thrown out. I've had both for years. I'm telling you this not to threaten you, but so you understand. I've known exactly who you were and exactly what you did for a long time. I'm not asking you to explain it to me tonight." "Then why," she started, voice breaking, "why did you let me work here? Why did you give me any of this, if you knew all of that?" I let the silence sit for a moment before I answered, because this part mattered more than anything else I'd say to her that night. Here is what Amaya never fully understood about me, even after 13 years of marriage. I was never withholding this moment to punish her. I was protecting the one person who mattered more than either of our pride. A boy who still needed to believe his mother could become someone he was proud of. My own conflict wasn't whether to forgive her. It was learning that peace and forgiveness aren't the same transaction, and that I could give Andre one without owing Amaya the other. "I'm not doing this because I still love you," I said, "and I'm not doing it to forgive you, not in the way you mean. I'm giving you a new employment contract, with strict, formal terms about how we co-parent Andre going forward, because our son asked me himself 3 weeks ago to give his mother one more chance." Amaya's face crumpled entirely. "He came into my office," I continued, "sat down across from me the way he always does, and asked me, very seriously, to please give you a chance to be the mother he still believes you can be." He's 11 years old, Amaya, and he still wants his mother to be someone he can be proud of.
That's the only reason there's a contract for you at all.
Amaya sank into the chair behind her, one hand pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent, devastating sobs. I left the room without another word. Later that night, alone in the hotel's parking garage, long after most of the guests had gone home, Amaya sat behind the wheel of her car without starting the engine, her reflection faint in the windshield glass, tears she no longer bothered to hide sliding down her face. "My son," she whispered to the empty car, voice barely audible even to herself. "He asked his father to give me a chance." The overhead lights of the garage buzzed faintly. Somewhere above her, an elevator chimed and released a handful of departing guests into the night. Amaya sat there a long time, alone, with the full weight of everything she had lost, and everything through no doing of her own. She was still somehow being given. Amaya signed the new employment agreement the following week. It was Essie who drafted the terms, careful and precise, the way only a family law attorney watching her brother's back could be. The contract addressed Amaya's role at Legacy Facilities Management in plain professional language. No favoritism, no special treatment because of our history. Clear performance expectations like any other employee. A separate document, handled through mediation, laid out revised custody terms. Consistent weekly co-parenting time with Andre, shared responsibility for school events and medical appointments, and clear boundaries neither of us was permitted to cross. I kept my distance from her emotionally, the way I'd promised myself I would the night I signed our divorce papers 2 years earlier. But I didn't make her small. I didn't parade my success in front of her or remind her even once of that night on the porch in Bronzeville. Amaya was Andre's mother, and whatever had broken between us as husband and wife, I wasn't willing to let it poison the only thing we still shared. We began meeting every other Wednesday evening, just the two of us, at a coffee shop near Andre's school, to go over his schedule, his grades, the small logistics of raising a child between two households. The conversations were brief, professional, sometimes even a little stiff, but they were honest, and over time, something almost like mutual respect began to settle into the space where our marriage used to be. "You've changed," Amaya said to me one of those Wednesdays, stirring her coffee slowly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Not just the company, you, the way you carry yourself." "I didn't change who I was," I told her. "I just stopped hiding it to make other people comfortable." She didn't have a response to that, and I didn't push for one. Legacy Facilities Management continued to grow in the months that followed. We expanded our footprint to 52 Chicago Public Schools buildings by the following spring, and I hired 2 more supervisors from among the original custodial staff I'd worked alongside years earlier at Simeon Career Academy. Men who had watched me push a supply cart down hallways for over a decade before they ever heard the words Chief Executive Officer attached to my name. One afternoon, Amaya overheard something in the break room that Essie later told me she couldn't stop thinking about for days. 2 CPS facilities directors, in the office for a quarterly review meeting, were chatting near the coffee station about why the district had ultimately chosen Legacy over 2 larger, more established competitors for the comprehensive contract. "Honestly," one of them said, "half of it came down to trust. Ellison worked in our buildings for over a decade. Man never missed a shift, never cut a corner, stayed late fixing things nobody asked him to fix. When it came time to sign a 5-year agreement, the boards felt like they already knew exactly who they were dealing with." Amaya, refilling her coffee a few feet away, stood very still, listening. It was, Essie told me later, the moment the last piece of her old thinking finally gave way. The realization that every quality she'd once been embarrassed by in me, the discipline, the humility, the willingness to do work others considered beneath them, was the exact foundation everything she now depended on for her own paycheck had been built on. She never said as much to me directly, But something in how she carried herself at work shifted after that. Quieter, more grounded, less performative than the woman who'd once posted photos of borrowed luxury with captions about leveling up. Andre noticed the change too, in his own 11-year-old way. He started mentioning, almost offhand, that his mom seemed less stressed lately, that she'd started cooking dinner more at his grandmother's, that she'd come to his basketball game the week before and actually stayed for the whole thing instead of leaving early.
I didn't correct him or comment much when he brought it up. I just listened, glad that whatever peace he was building for himself was real, even if it had come from circumstances more complicated than an 11-year-old needed to understand. One evening in late November, I stayed at the office long after everyone else had gone home, standing at the window of my corner office, looking out over a Chicago skyline lit gold and silver against an early winter sky. It was almost exactly 2 years to the week since I'd stood at a much smaller window in a much smaller office, whispering to myself about the man I wanted my son to see. I opened my desk drawer and found the flash drive Essie had given me before the CPS ceremony, the one with Andre's crayon drawing and his careful, uneven handwriting. I turned it over once in my hand, feeling something settle deep and quiet in my chest. Not triumph exactly, and not quite peace either, but something close to both. "My son," I said softly, to no one but the empty office and the city lights below, "has grown up more than I realized." I thought about all of it then, the porch in Bronzeville, the voicemail I never deleted, a home equity line quietly redirected into a company nobody believed in yet, the years of overtime shifts and waxed gym floors, the champagne flute shattering against a ballroom floor. None of it had been about revenge, not really, no matter how satisfying certain moments had felt in the instant they happened. It had all been about one boy, 11 years old now, who needed to grow up knowing that a man's worth isn't measured by the job title on his paycheck, but by what he's willing to build and protect when everyone around him has already written him off. I switched off the office lights, locked the door behind me, and drove home through quiet Chicago streets, already thinking about Sunday and church and the particular kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from finally being at rest with who you are. That Sunday, we all went to church together. Xavier, Amaya, and Andre, sitting in the same pew at the small Baptist church in Bronzeville, where Afua had worshipped for over 30 years. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't the two of us pretending to be husband and wife again for our son's benefit. It was simpler than that, and in some ways harder to explain. Two parents who had once broken each other, choosing, deliberately, to sit peacefully in the same row for the sake of the boy between them. Afua found me after the service, pulling Andre into a warm, tight hug before turning to me with tears standing bright in her eyes. "You did good, Xavier," she said, patting my arm the way she had since Andre was a baby. "Real good. Your father would be proud of the man you turned out to be." I thanked her quietly, the way I thanked most things that mattered too much to talk about at length. Amaya stood a few feet away, watching Andre laugh at something his grandmother said, and for a moment I caught her trying to smile at him, the way a mother smiles when she's genuinely, unreservedly happy. Not performing happiness for an audience, not curating a version of herself for social media, just present, just there. I looked at the woman who used to be my wife across the church parking lot, sunlight cutting through a gap in the clouds, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel that day. Not love, not the old kind anyway, but something quieter and, in its own way, more durable. I didn't love Amaya the way I once had. I doubted I ever would again. But I had made a choice, somewhere in the last 2 years, not to let bitterness toward her become the water Andre had to swim through for the rest of his childhood. Some people would call that weakness. I'd learned, the hard way, that it's actually the harder path, choosing not to hate someone who hurt you, especially when you have every right to.
I didn't build legacy facilities management to prove anything to Amaya, or to Victor, or to anyone who ever looked at a man pushing a supply cart down a school hallway and decided they already knew everything worth knowing about him. I built it because I wanted my son to understand something that took me 42 years and one broken marriage to fully learn myself. A man can be disrespected, underestimated, humiliated for the work he does with his own two hands, and still rise to build something larger than anyone who doubted him ever imagined possible.
That evening, after Andre had gone to bed, I sat alone on my back porch with a cup of coffee going lukewarm beside me, thinking about all the small, ordinary moments that had led to this one. Waxing gym floors at midnight, a $2,400 tuition payment for a course that never once mattered to the person I paid for it. A voicemail I never deleted, a home equity line quietly redirected while everyone assumed I had nothing to my name. None of it had felt like victory in the moment. Most of it had just felt like showing up, one more day, for a reason bigger than myself. This story reminds us that quiet dignity isn't something you announce. It's something you practice, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, long after anyone is left to give you credit for it. If you've spent years feeling smaller than you are, in a marriage, in a family, in a life that didn't turn out the way the wedding photos once promised, here's something to try this week, not someday. Pull out the recipe box on your kitchen counter, the one with your mother's handwriting fading on the index cards, and copy one recipe onto a fresh card in your own hand, so it survives another 50 years. Call your grandson this Saturday morning and ask him to help you finally sort through the toolbox in the garage, not because it needs sorting, but because he needs to hear you talk while your hands are busy. Keep a small spiral notebook by your recliner, the kind from the drugstore, and every Sunday after service, write down one thing you did that week that nobody applauded. Read the whole notebook back to yourself on New Year's Eve, out loud, in your own kitchen. You don't need anyone's permission to know your own worth. You just need one small, repeatable habit that reminds you of it, long after the people who doubted you have stopped watching. If you've ever spent years being underestimated by someone who was supposed to love and respect you, in a marriage, in a family, in a career where no one saw your worth until it was undeniable, I hope this story reminded you that your quiet, steady work is never wasted, even on the days it feels invisible to everyone around you. If you've ever been looked down on for the work you do, drop a comment below. I've been there too. And if you want to know what happens next, when Victor Lang resurfaces in Chicago with one more attempt to disrupt the peace Xavier built, Part 2 arrives in 48 hours. Human writers poured their soul into these scripts to expose injustice and celebrate humanity. AI served as a technical supporter, refining expression so the valuable messages of equality, humility, and hope could reach and inspire millions. Production team: story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.